Good evening. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the Susan Draper White Lectures. For decades, women have been entering and changing the theological conversation. I went to seminary in the 90s, and that was during the time of the reimagining conferences, when women were saying that we lead in different ways, but that we are part of this tradition from the beginning. You've just forgotten to include us in the histories. The Susan Draper White Lectures give us an opportunity to engage with scholars and preachers and teachers and leaders in all of the fields of theological education, to engage them as they create the future. I want to introduce to you Dr. Carolyn Pressler. She's a Harry C. Piper Professor of Biblical Interpretation, and she is one of the founding members of the Susan Draper White Lectures. Dr. Pressler.
Good evening, and thank you for being here. At the opening of Northside Women's Space, which Dr. Alika Galloway will speak to us about this evening, Dr. Ralph Galloway introduced his wife and co-pastor as the most powerful woman he had ever met. Yes. Reflecting on what to say about Reverend Dr. Alika Galloway this evening, Dr. Ralph's words came back to me forcefully. I doubt it would be possible to sit in the same room with my dear sister and colleague, Dr. Alika Galloway, without recognizing that one is in the presence of a towering spirit. So I asked myself, what is it about her that makes her so amazingly powerful? Well, she most assuredly has a powerful intellect. No question about that. Dr. Alika is blessed and blesses us with an absolutely brilliant mind, well-honed by graduate studies with such foremothers of womanist theology as Dr. Jacqueline Grant at ITC, where she received her Master's of Divinity, and at Virginia Union, where last spring she successfully defended her doctorate. Pastor Alika Galloway is adept at theoretical, hypothetical, theological, what other goals could I get in there? Thought, abstract thought, the kind that lets her edit books, write books, and it is a good book, whether you like it or not right now, Pastor, and to design and teach so many courses here at United, as well as to keynote events such as our own. But at the same time, her concrete, practical, organizational acumen is also incredibly empowering and has allowed her to conceive of and bring into being a plethora of community ministries, from using sidewalk art to teach kids about HIV/AIDS and how to avoid it, or creating community gardens with the neighborhood, or developing a middle school academy, or founding Northside Women's Space. And as someone who is on the theological, theoretical, hypothetical, et cetera, end of things, let me tell you, it is not always given to people to have both theoretical and practical acumen, and how blessed we are that you are powerful in that way. The kind of work she does has gained the attention of a lot of people around here. She's a well-known activist whose acumen has been recognized by the National Council of Churches, the Circle of Names campaign, the Minnesota Women's Press Changemakers Award, the Governor's Martin Luther King Jr. Award in Excellence in Community Service, and by being made a Bush Fellow. That kind of work requires a powerful theoretical and practical intellect. it also requires powerful courage. And let me quickly note that by courage I do not mean the absence of fear. It is scary to step out and lead in the ways that Dr. Galloway leads us. I mean courage in the sense of a fierce resolve not to allow fear to stop her from doing what the congregation and the community needs to have done. She also possesses the power of determined and righteous anger. I remember well an afternoon at Women's Space where, at her invitation, I volunteer, when Pastor Alika came in and said, pimps with a stable of 3 women and girls are making $500,000 a year. And from her gut was torn a no. And I heard God in that no. And that no, torn from her heart and her belly, fuels her hands, her feet, her minds, and her imaginations as she struggles along with the community against modern-day slavery, that is, sex trafficking. What also guides her actions, and I believe what comes closer to the heart of our dear friend and sister's power, is the power of fierce, intelligent, courageous, feisty love. Mother and grandmother, I learned tonight to 12, I thought it was 9, but 12. Alika loves her family fiercely and fights for the future of her grandchildren, of which there's a beautiful grandbaby right there. She loves Kwanzaa church community. That's another of her families, one which she and Pastor Ralph co-founded. She loves the people of Northside, Minneapolis, loves her people, African American people, loves her students, and I am here to testify, pragmatically, graciously, generously loves her colleagues and friends. And above all, Pastor Alika Galloway palpably and powerfully loves her God. Alika Galloway's power, finally, is that of a God-centered, Jesus-loving, Spirit-led prophet. It is my very great honor to introduce to you my sister and friend, the Reverend Dr. Alika Galloway, brilliant, gutsy, fierce, loving, faithful, God-inspired, and yes, very, very powerful woman. Dr. Galloway.
That is embarrassing. Thank you so much, my sister, friend, Dr. Carolyn. Thank you so much, Dr. B, who we love and adore as well, for the privilege of being here. Thank you, Aisha and Anara. That's my grandbaby right there, my baby. She's a little big for a baby, but that's, as mothers, those are our babies. And all my Kwanzaa family, I greet you. And we're going to tonight, and all the rest of you who are my sisters and my friends and my sojourners along the way, tonight we're going to talk about something that I believe troubles God's heart, and it makes God angry. We're going to talk about one black church's response to sex trading and trafficking, and it is just one. But before I do that, I must let you know that I'm standing on some shoulders. When Dr. Jacqueline Grant, who was the mother of womanist theology, met me in the hall at ITC, I was walking down the hall and she says, "Hello, how are you?" And I said, "Hello, how are you?" And I was trying to run from her because really she was why I was there. I just wanted to sit at her feet. I just wanted to learn. And she said to me, "Why are you here?" And I said, well, one, and this was really why I was in the hall at that time, because my other daughter was a baby, and Ralph had mistakenly taken all the money, and so I had to get some money for Pampers. So I was trying to get to his class so I could get some money for Pampers, because that's how it works. And Dr. Grant said, "Are you a student?" And I said, "Yes, I'm going to be a student." And she said, "What do you wish to study?" And I said, "Well, I came to study with you, Dr. Grant." And she said, "Do you understand whose shoulders you're standing on?" And I started crying then. And she marched me around the seminary while Yana was sitting in the car with her brother needing her diaper changed while I'm trying to find the money from her daddy. And she marched me around the seminary and she said, "Let me tell you about Jarena Lee." And so I'm standing on Jarena Lee's shoulders today. And she said, "Let me tell you that Mary McLeod Bethune didn't want to be a teacher. She wanted to be a preacher, but they said no. You're standing on her shoulders today. And let me tell you about Sojourner Truth. And you're standing on her shoulders today." And she said, "And so you stand and you stand and you stand and you stand and you stand." She said, "But let me tell you one thing." She said, "Now that baby's going to be all right, because I must have had that little itch, that mama itch." And she said, "That baby is going to be all right. I need for you to pause while I tell you this one thing." And I said, "What is it?" And she said, "At ITC, not only are you going to stand on shoulders, you're going to prepare your shoulders for someone else to stand on them." Thanks be unto God. We sent probably 10 people, including the Reverend Paula Sanders, to UTS. Reverend Anthony Ross Alum is one of ours. I know many people claim you, but for tonight, you're going to be one of ours. Sister Sarita is here. We're standing, you're standing, you're standing, you're standing, and you are at this institution so that, in fact, you can prepare your shoulders for someone else to stand on them, and that's the privilege. And then I want to always greet you in the name of my grandmothers who also practice the sex trade. You see, my grandmothers both practiced it in a different way. One was a domestic, one was an occupational therapist. But within the tradition of generational poverty, you rarely get out of here as an African-American woman without trading some type of sex. And so Granny Elvoyd traded some kisses and some hugs and some other things up on a hill in St. Louis so that she would have a burial plot in order for her one and only daughter not to have to pay for her funeral. Granny Dolly was a domestic on what they called the place. She stayed on the place. That means she stayed in the place where she worked. And her boss, she used to call master. Now, understand this is just a little while ago, but Master John really liked her a lot. And all of a sudden, we would receive a new coat, or we would receive some shoes, or we would receive something that was not able to come or be purchased out of the little bit of money that she had. Now, I didn't understand at that time how she got it for us, but now I'm standing on her shoulders, and I am remembering the price that she paid in order for us to have. My last gift from her was a pair of patent leather boots, knee-high, that went above the knee. Now, I am worried about how she got them, but when I tell you I pranced around Columbia College with Daisy Dukes and those boots on, that's probably how I got around. But anyway, but that was exceptional. Thank you for so many of our mothers have paid such a high price. So upon leaving seminary, I had declared, while I was in seminary, y'all don't worry, I don't see well. That's the reason I have all these notes. It's in 25. Don't worry, we're not going to be here all day. So upon leaving seminary, and I'm going to move away from them for a minute so I can be in touch with you. Upon leaving seminary, I had declared, one, that I would never pastor anybody. I was headed for the academy. Ralph got a call here, and so I had to come here. I was preparing for my PhD at Emory. And so I was never going to pastor. God, please don't worry about me with that. I'm not a good preacher. I don't really like the pastorate. I basically took basic college. I didn't know what I was doing, but God had a different design and called me into the pastorate of the first African American and the only African American led Presbyterian church in the state of Minnesota. And when I tell you I did not know what to do, I did not know what to do. But this is what I knew for sure, because I was standing on Jacqueline Grant's shoulders, that if you want to understand the nexus of the community, it's always within the women's stories. The women's stories will tell you about how the community is doing. So at that time, Aisha was in high school, Ayana was in elementary school, and they had different start times, but I would leave our house early in the morning before daybreak, and I would sit on the corner, I would sit literally on the steps of the church, and I would always have some bags waiting to hear the women's stories that were coming back and forth on Emerson Avenue. And I would sit on the steps, and I sometimes would have a coat on, but I would always just look very basic, and I would sit on those steps, and the women, because I was from the South, I would say, "How you doing this morning?" You know, and they would say, you know, first they kind of looked like, who is this talking to me? And besides, why are you asking me how you doing? Because in Minnesota, you don't ask how you doing. But I would sit on the corner, on the little steps, and I would say, how you doing this morning? And pretty soon, because people crave real relationships, and they could see it on my face, and so they would start sitting with me, and they would say, can I just sit here a little while with you? Yes, honey, sit down. You got something to eat? So I would start bringing little sandwiches. You got something to drink? And I would start bringing little stuff. And you got a rag with you? And I would start bringing what I know that they needed. You know, and I would begin to listen to their stories. And I would also begin to look at them. Because as a womanist ethical person, womanists love each other's flesh. We pay attention. We look. We look at your face, we look at your hands, we look at what you wear, we look at how's your feet, and we feel you. There is, of course, in the academic realm, we can talk about what womanists are and what they don't do and what they do, but essentially we love each other's flesh. We appreciate what's going on, and these sisters would look one way, but then they would come with a hurt arm, or they would come with a battered face, or they would come with unknown scars, and I would say, how you get that? And I would never introduce myself as pastor. I would just be the crazy woman that was sitting on the steps. You see, sometimes craziness helps you. Yeah, it does. Because, you know, we don't need to do all that assumption when you're trying to build relationships. And so our oneness, our humanness would meet each other early in the morning, and sometimes they would sit and cry, and they would rock. You see, my grandmothers used to rock, and when you are in pain, you grab hold of that. And so they would rock, and I would rock right with them. You see, women is rock with each other. Because sometimes things are so beyond words. You have to embody it. And so we would rock, and as we rocked, they began to tell me their story. You know, this one, they knocked me up today, and this one this, and this one that, and oh, but I got the money. You want to see my money? You got some money? You need a little bit of this here? I can break some of that off for you. No, honey, I'm fine. And then they would say, you know, I did good tonight. I can keep my children in school tonight. I'm going to go, well, where are you going now? Oh, I'm going to go ahead and buy that butter. I'm going to go ahead and buy those Pampers. You see, I was walking down the hall trying to find the money in seminary while these women were turning tricks. They were in the survival sex trade. And that essentially means it's the kind of sex trade that oftentimes you don't do with a pimp, but you do it simply because of generational poverty. Simply because you have to use your body to bear the brand. And so these women were engaged in this ancient way of African American female generational survival. I knew about it. Now, I didn't know really at that time what I knew. And that's the other thing about women is we pay attention. we always take little snapshots of life, and then we kind of code them, and then they come back to us in quiet meditation. And so they began to say, you know what? Today, doggone it, I'm going to be able to spend another night in Hotel 6. And I was going back to 1623 Washburn in North Minneapolis. And I was saying, well, how many you do tonight? How many you do today? Sister, well, I worked hard, but it was kind of slow tonight. I said, well, how many you do? I only had about 15. 15. 15 encounters, that's what they are, 15 days. 10 to 15 dates with strangers. Most of the women use some type of chemical. And the reason why they did is because you cannot stay within your body saying, a cell what is sacred. You cannot do it. You must have an alter identity. And so they oftentimes would have different names. And if they were pimps, the names would be tattooed on their neck or tattooed somewhere on their body. They would be bruised and they would be battered. And I began to ponder. I prayed a long time ago, and it was a dangerous prayer. I prayed simply this: God, break my heart for the things that break yours. So many days I wish I could have taken that back, because they would say, baby, what you crying for? Well, I don't know, maybe I have something in my eye. Did I say something to upset you? And without giving away my identity, I said, well, I'm just crying for you. And they said, baby, I ain't got no time for tears. I'm just got to make it. So these women are and were and will forever be in this sense of dislocation from their self. They are disembodied, because you cannot sell your body and stay in it. You are disembodied. And the way they would become to get back into their body so that they could parent was to rock. And so we rocked a lot. Do you remember Toni Morrison in Beloved says that there is a loneliness that can be rocked, arms crossed, knees drawn, holding on. This motion, unlike a ship, soothes and contains the rocker. It's an inside kind, wrapped tight like skin. The women that I met on those steps, they rocked. They were victims of loneliness. They were victims of isolation, stigmatization, and shame, trying to live by utilizing an ancient survival practice that many employed, but few talked about openly. The women bore witness and testified to the emotional and physical toil of sexual surrogacy and oppression. They were sisters, much like Hagar, the ancient biblical sexual surrogate. Their stories repeated the refrain of the 1920 Bertha's Chippy Hills blues song, named Streetwalkers Blues. Got the streetwalkers blues, wanna walk the streets all night. Got the streetwalkers blues, walk the streets all night and day. I'm gonna walk these blues away. If you ain't got $1, just give me one lousy dime. If you ain't got $1, just give me one lousy dime. 'Cause the landlord's singing the blues, 'cause my rent's behind. That's what survival sex is about. It's about paying your rent so that you and your family can survive. As a black church pastor, I began listening to the women's stories whose rent was due and they neither had $1 or a dime. And what they had, they used to get dollars to pay their rent and dimes to buy food for their children. They traded sex so their children and families would not have to walk the streets. The women were ashamed and they suffered their shame by themselves. The irony of the isolation and stigmatization is that it's a heavy load and it exacerbates the shame and isolation and the loneliness. Dr. Lauren Martin notes that the sex trading and trafficking are fueled by our silence and the shame and stigma our society places on its victim survivors. The more we can talk and we can connect and we can unravel the shame, silence, and stigma, the more we can work together collectively towards ending this practice. We must bring it out. We must have a conversation about it. Even if in the conversation we say something really stupid. Now, I say that because they say there are no stupid questions. Well, some of the questions I asked those women were really stupid, and they let me know that very quickly. One pulled a knife on me and held it to my throat. And these are stories my children do not know, nor my husband. And Aisha, don't you tell your daddy. But she pulled that knife and held it to my throat, and this is how I got her to release me. I said, baby, I know I asked you something stupid. And she didn't use those kind of words. I need to say that. And I said, first I asked for you to, I apologize to you. She said, well, I'm just thinking maybe I ought not to cut you. And I said, I would appreciate it if you don't, because my babies don't know where I am. She said, well, where's your man? I said, he's already gone. I said, and if I don't come home, my babies will be lost. And she said, well, for the sake of your babies, I'm not going to cut you from stem to stern. But don't you ask me no more stupid questions. So I learned to listen, because what does Tillich say? The first duty of love is to listen. But there's stories. You know, there is a spiritual that says there is a troubling in my soul. And that kind of trouble, it makes you want to vomit. It makes you want to throw up, because particularly you swallowed it and swallowed it and swallowed it and swallowed it, and it becomes kind of like curdled milk in your stomach, and I didn't know what to do with it. I thought I was going to hear one thing and began to hear something else, but I didn't know what to do. And so in our process, Ralph and I started talking about it, and he said, Lika, he said, I see it, but because by then he had come to the church. He wasn't at the church at that time. He was at Hospitality House, Boys and Girls Club, and he said, I've seen it. And he said, and these sisters, you know, would stop me every day and try to solicit me. He said, and so I've just started, you know, keeping a little money, you know, and passing it out. And I'm going, honey, I don't think that's such a good idea. But he said, what are we going to do? Yes, that's the question. What are we going to do? Well, the telling of one's stories at Kwanzaa is paramount to who we are. And so we began to talk about these stories in the congregation. And I asked the sisters I've had a sister meeting one time. I said, yeah, we're going to have a sacred sister circle. And so the sisters gathered together, and I started telling them the stories, and they started rocking. They started rocking. So we rocked a while. And I said, let's close our eyes except me. And we rocking. How many, and there was probably about 25 women in that circle. How many of you have experienced this and we still rocking? The hands started going up. Now, I wasn't on the street, Pastor Alika, but my husband would beat me real bad. And I said, uh-huh. And the only way I could quiet him down, because he would be drunk and high on that stuff by then, and we rocking. Oh, there's something so comforting about it. And so the only way I could get him to be quiet was to go upstairs and work with him a little bit. But then if I learned a new technique, he would beat me all the more because he said I was out chipping. But you know why I never told? Why didn't you? Because then he would beat my children. So I would sneak and watch pornography so I could learn new tricks to keep him satisfied so that he would not beat my babies. That day, 9 out of 10 of the women told stories of generational sex trading and trafficking. So we began to not only listen, but to respond to the stories. I was asked by Gretchen Muscat, who is the Commissioner of Health for Minneapolis, to come and sit on a board that would access and we begin to look at what was the state of urban health in Minneapolis. And so we sat on this board and we talked a lot for about a year. And there was every ethnic group that you can imagine, and we were very diverse in terms of ethnicity, very diverse in terms of sexuality, very diverse in terms of gender identification. And we argued and we talked, but we all stayed at the table because what Gretchen was trying to do was assess really the state of urban health without doing it through quantitative analysis. She said, we can get enough statistics, but that doesn't tell us whether or not we are going to be well and how we can be well. So finally, one of our Native brothers and sisters who rarely said anything, Tony Looking Elk usually said nothing. He would come in, and I was amazed at his composure. And because we would be at it. And Tony would just sit there and he would look. And then one day he stood up and he says, I have the answer. Thanks be unto God. And I said, what? So Gretchen, if somebody said, what is it? He said, this is what we should do, because in our tradition, we are a storytelling tradition. And so let us set up a paradigm in which people can feel safe to tell their stories, but let's have an operating question. Yes, and we all came around that, and then we argued for another 6 months about what the question should be. And so we finally came up with this question: when was the last time you felt well? We said, now whatever they answer, that's going to tell us a lot. And so they said, Alika, your job is to gather about 30 women, diverse ages, together at Kwanzaa, because remember I told you we have a storytelling paradigm that was already set up. And so they said, gather these women, only talk for 45 minutes. Now that was, I said, you want me to gather who? Black women? We can't say good morning in 45 minutes. That's what we're going to do. Okay, I said, you're going to bring food, we're going to bring food. So we began the circle of when was the last time you felt well? The people began to tell their stories, and the Minneapolis came and recorded it, and it became this new paradigm for how to assess wellness throughout the state of Minnesota. So we were at the social work, School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota, and we were telling this how this came about and helping other health departments do the same thing. And of course, I was double booked, running. But outside of the auditorium were all of these big bulletin boards. So I ran out. I was trying to dash, and I ran out. And by then I was still praying. But prayer has brought me through. I was still praying. I was running, and I'm sure I was praying about something. But I looked at the corner of my eye, and I saw a great big bulletin board, and it said, sex trading and trafficking in North Minneapolis. And I stopped, and I ran over to the bulletin board, and it was written by Dr. Lauren Martin. The research was conducted by Dr. Lauren Martin. And this is what it said. It said that on the average, girls enter into the sex trade between 11 and 13 in North Minneapolis. I had a 13-year-old daughter. Tears are a gift. Because some things hurt you so bad. And I can't remember how old Yana was, but she was already positioned. You can see it. I was already beating up older men looking at my baby. She said 90% of the sex trading that goes on in North Minneapolis happens on the corner of Broadway and Emerson. That's exactly where the church was. On the corner of Broadway and Emerson, a little bit further down where the bus stop is. And being naive, I thought folk were just catching the bus, but they were catching something else. Right on the corner. That's the reason why the sisters were walking back and forth in front of me on those steps. She said 90% of it, 85% of it is cross-generational. How do I know that is the fact? Because fast forward, and I'm going to come back to the dating statistics. One of the women at Northside Women's Space, where right on that corner now, told me this story. She said, we were just talking. We were just rocking. Talking and rocking. Because in order to do this work, you've got to sit down for a while. I bless God for Dr. Carolyn, who just comes and sits. Because the primary tool is relationship. Just sit down and talk about whatever you want to talk about. And she said, Pastor Alika, I got a story to tell you. You want to know how I got in this work? And this sister looked like she was 70 years old, but she was a fat 25. And I said, how'd you get help, honey? Whatever you want to tell me, it's all right. And she said, when I was 12 years old, I had 6 brothers and sisters, and I'm kind of in the middle. And my mama had run out of food stamps. And I said, where was your daddy? I don't know who he is. And she said, we were hungry. It's close to the end of the year, end of the month, and we were hungry. And she said, my mama said, go get that black dress that Sister so-and-so gave you and put that on. And she said, I put it on and I thought I was looked fly. I thought I looked really good. And she said, and don't leave it raw. And she said, I thought that was strange for my mama to say that. And I said, Mama, what we gonna have for lunch? She said, I'm gonna tell you in a minute. And she said, now, you know the black patent leather pumps I got that y'all like to play? And she said, go get those. And so she said, put them on. And she said, come here, child, sit in between my legs. Let me comb your hair. So I sat in between my mama's legs, she combed my hair. And she kept saying, now, it's gonna hurt a little bit, but it's gonna be all right. And I didn't know what my mama was talking about. And when she got finished combing my hair, she put some red lipstick on me, and she walked me to the door, and she said, and she grabbed me. She grabbed me. My mama ain't never done nothing like that. And she said, you got a money maker in that. Don't come home till you got enough money to buy dinner. Now, I want you to go around the corner. Mr. Sam is going to meet you there. Matter of fact, don't come home till you got dinner, breakfast, and lunch for the next day. Because by then, our food will be gone. Survival sex. So we're starting between 11 and 13. 85% of the women surveyed had massive violence. Many of the women at the Northside Women's Space have said that they are happy that they have born children early, because by the time they get finished in the trade, their organs are so decimated they can no longer birth their children. On the average, you do turn 12 to 15 tricks, but because it's North Minneapolis, you may make $20, $10 a hit. While the pimps, on average, if they have 3 to 5 women and girls in their stable, make $500,000. Now, all people involved in sex trade are not pimps. That's really important. And most of the women that we work with, that we have the privilege of seeing Jesus' face in, those women are not pimp, generally. Usually, according to Dr. Martin, and what our qualitative analysis has demonstrated, is that it is an end of the month activity. But the end of the month activity may be 2 weeks depending, right? So we may start like at the 15th and not into the 31st, because there has to be so much activity in order to get the rent paid. So we began to think together collectively at Kwanzaa about what difference can we make. Well, because we're Presbyterian, and that's another story. I'll tell that. Any other Presbyterian? Okay, hallelujah. Don't tell a story. But anyway, we had 2 buildings, and our congregation made a decision that they, in fact, would give one of the buildings to start a home place, a safe place of rest, respite, remembrance, and revitalization for trafficked and traded prostituted women. Because the research that Dr. Martin had done coincided with the research that we had done. And what happened was that the women, in fact, designed the space. When asked what Dr. Martin's research, what do you need? This is what the women said. We want someplace beautiful. Straight up. We don't want a flop house. We want a place where we can drop in anytime. And we want to feel welcomed no matter what we look like. And we don't want to be judged. And we want a place where we can talk if we feel like it and shut up if we feel like it. And we want to create beauty just like we used to do at my grandma's house. And so we began to think about what does that look like. And we brought it to our leadership and our congregation. And there was a unanimous vote that day. Give the sisters the building. It was full access. It was right on the bus line. It was available. It was beautiful. We could tend to it and the women could come. And Pastor Alika, we want you to lead it. God, I didn't sign up for all that. Well, we began to have a series of community meetings. And in this series of community meetings, this is a 120-year-old building. In this series of community meetings, we had all the community come. It was an open invitation. We want to tell you what we are doing at this time. And we want you to come and let us know what you think, whether it's important. And of course, the politicians came in, many of the Hawthorne, Jordan neighborhood council came, and they all accused us of bringing prostitution into the area. That was, I'm so glad that Jesus cussed folk out, because they got a good cussing at me. And so this sanctuary that was to be the drop-in space was full of beautiful stained glass windows. And as a liberation theologian in Ephesus, we believe that God meets you on the margins. If you want to understand who God is, then you have to go where God lives. And God lives in the face of the poor. God lives with poverty. So I'm a God searcher. I'm hungry and thirsty after God. So one of the reasons why I said yes was so that I could meet God on the corner. And so everybody came, and we expected maybe 30 or 40 people, and the whole sanctuary was full, maybe sat 200 folks, and all these beautiful windows, because we said, you want to come to a beautiful place. And all of a sudden, this young woman stood up, and this young person stood up, and I wasn't quite sure what she was going to say, but she demanded to speak. And so I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, but I want to know, I said, yes. And I'm going to say, my name is Alika, but I could tell she could beat me down. So she said, what I want to know is, you know who I am? I said, I don't know your name. You know what I am? I said, you're a beloved child of the divine. You know who the hell I am? And what I do? No, I don't know what you do, but if you want to come and tell me, I'll be glad to listen. She said, well, you don't know whether I'm a boy or a girl, do you? I said, it doesn't matter to me. Well, what I want to know from you, is how you expect for me to come up in here and you see that white Jesus all up in there and you see this and all of his crew looking at me and they don't like folk like me and I can't come up in here, but I need to come up in here. And I said, well, you're welcome to come. Well, how am I going to do that? I said, I don't know how you're going to do it, but we're going to work that out. Within a month, the windows are gone. Because everyone is welcome. It is God's place, it is God's territory, and we're sitting at the welcome table. Now, in order to get that through Presbyterian process, we have to pray and pray and pray because Presbyterians like their property. But we were able to manage that because we were creating what Bell Hooks calls a home place. And a home place, according to Bell Hooks, are places of healing and divine rest for weary African American women. And it's a places, and she talks about in her work, yearnings. It is places that are oftentimes made out of remnants of things. Oh, it's not fancy. This is, okay, I'm gonna borrow that kitchen stool from your grandma, and I'm gonna borrow this, and who got a rag, and let's clean it up, and you got a pot, and somebody go up there and get us some collard greens, and it's gonna be a place where we can talk and rock for a while. That's a home place. And so what we did was we considered the Northside Women's Space a home place for prostituted African American women who were victims, not of sexuality, but victims of generational poverty, whose individual assets were used and degraded in order to get what was rightfully theirs as a human being. The right to safety, the right to be able to feed your children, the right to be able to clothe your babies, the right to go to work. Because one of the women said this, she said it quite succinctly, I think. She said, now, ain't nobody in their right mind want to sell their bodies. Who wants to be bothered with that? Ain't nobody want to do all that. She said, but what I want to do is when my babies look at me, I want them to see me as a mother. I don't want to see them crying. I don't want to see them dying. I don't want them to be ashamed of me. So I do it on the off hours when I send them to school. But when they go on, when all the rest of the babies go on a field trip, I want to be able to give my child 50 cents too. So I do what I got to do. This is all I got. This is what I get. So we created this place, a home place. And literally, when you walk into the sanctuary now, it's just glass. There's no stained glass windows. There's 3 or 4 big old tables. And what we do is we eat. We eat a lot, and we eat really good food. And we sit around and we talk. And we swap stories. And then we begin to work on these multiple layers of loss. For you do not get in that position without being severely traumatized. So Kwanzaa's Northside Women's Space has a trauma specialist. And her name is Arlene Walker. And she's going to be here tomorrow. And she begins to work through a process of trauma reduction. Sometimes we bead. Dr. Carolyn brings beads. She sits and she tells a story. And the story oftentimes is that of racialized poverty. And there's been a couple of times where we have been telling stories and the women will look at Dr. Carolyn, well, you really ain't, you all right. You all right. You all right. Because they it's a little uncomfortable because oftentimes what happens is that the Johns are white men. This is the trajectory. We're right by downtown. A lot of those Johns are in the IDS building, and they come in for a little morning delight. They drive into the north side. They hook up. They pay their little $10, maybe $20. Then they go back to work and then shoot right back to the suburbs. And the women are angry about it. What time is it?
Take your time. It's 8:30, but we have until 9.
Huh?
It's 8:30.
I talked to her out.
It's okay. We have until 9, my sister.
Okay. 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 All right. I'm gonna conclude with this. So, what does the home place look like? It is this place of rest. We practice the Shabbat there, where people get to rest, just be. No one asks you anything that you don't want to take. We always offer some water, because when you're in the street, nobody gives you. We offer a place to wash. One woman came in one day, and even though this is 12 years a slave, and that's one of the reasons this happened in 12 years a slave, but I'm telling you, this happens in the Northside every day. When we were in that building, I was sat by the front door, and the sister knocked on the door, and she said, "Can I come in?" And I said, "You're welcome here." And so she came up the stairs. She said, "Are you Pastor Alika?" I said, "Yes." And she said, and I said, "Have a seat." She said, "No, I don't want to sit down on your good stuff." She said, "Because I've been in the street for 4 days." And she said, "But this is okay. Can I have a washcloth?" I said, "Yes, you can have a washcloth." "You got any soap?" "Yeah." I said, "Why don't you give me a hug?" She said, "I don't want to hug you because I stink. I'm so tired of stinking." She said, "I got a washcloth for me." I said, "Well, no, you can give me a hug." She said, "You ain't never smelled nothing like this." And I said, "I think I have." And so I said, "Is it all right to touch you?" She said, "I would love to be touched by a woman." So I just grabbed her and I just embraced her. I used to I thank God now for my size and for my ampleness. Because sometimes you got to touch flesh. You know, and I grabbed her and I held her really close to me, and she did stink. But what I smelled was grace. And I smelled mercy. And I stroked her head, and I said, "What kind?" I said, "I got some lavender soap." And so I gave her 3 washcloths and some lavender soap. And she said, "You got a comb and a brush?" And I gave her a comb and a brush. She said, "How long can I stay in the bathroom?" You see, because at McDonald's, they don't let me go to the bathroom unless I'm lying down. They take your money, but you can't pee. God don't like her. And so I gave it to her. She came out, and she looked like a new person. And she said, "Now I can tell you my story." And I said, "Okay." And so we sat there, and she said, "Now I got to go back on the street because I got to just get a little bit more money. My children are at Motel 6, and the rent is due, and they don't kick me out. And so what I need for you to do is to go into the chapel and pray with me. Pray I can get 3 more encounters. That's all I need, and I got my money." So I'm going, okay. Jack and Grant said, "I'm standing our shoulders." Well, they can teach you to pray at ITC about how to get somebody to get some money from a job in order to pay their rent. That was not part of the curriculum. That it may be here, Dr. B, but they don't teach you at ITC how to pray up no free encounters. So I'm praying, God help me. Because see, you cannot do this work, and that's part of the Black church tradition, is we're praying people. And we're not ashamed about what we ask for. So I'm like walking, going, "God, help me know what to say." She said, "Now get down on bended knees." I said, "God, if I get down on bended knees, you're going to have to pray me up." So we can do that. So I got down on bended knees, And I started rocking, she started rocking. And I said, God in your mercy. So glad I had praying moments. I said, God in your mercy. I ask you to make a way out of no way. Oh, see, I love that that's part of the Black church tradition, is making a way out of no way. And we've all witnessed and testified that God is able. And so I said, God, I ask you to make a way out of no way for this sister who has to pay their rent. See, I could not ask God to bless her to go back to the street and get beat up, but I had to pray. And so I asked God, I said, God, make a way out of no way. I ask you in the name of Jesus. And Lord, bless us to be a blessing. And when I got up, I remembered that my Bush Fellowship check was in my purse, uncashed. And we were right by U.S. Bank. And so the way that God made was for me to take that sister over to U.S. Bank, sign the check, and say, now you got your rent. Here you go. Because part of the Black tradition, the Black church tradition, even though we're wrestling with issues of sexuality, we still are a generous people. And so she was able to stay. She said, can I come back next week? I said, you can come as welcome as you are. And how about if I hook you up with some services? Yes, please, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am. But she left there dancing, and so did I. That's what the Northside Women's Space looks like. It's nothing fancy. It doesn't, as a matter of fact, right now, the pipes are broken and the heat is off because the heater broke. And yet the work continues because we as Black women create home places out of little bits of remnants of stuff so that our sisters can come and rock and heal and rest and remember and have their souls revived. That's home place. That's one Black church's response to the sex trade and trafficking in North Minneapolis. Thank you.